My name is Isabella Ward. The last thing I remember before the world went black was the smell of oak polish and the sharp crack of my ribs against the staircase. I wasn't falling. I was thrown. My husband Ethan's hand was still in the air when I hit the bottom step, and the chandelier above me trembled with the echo of his rage. Blood spread across the white wood like a slow confession. My breath came in short, wet bursts. Every inhale was pain. Every exhale was disbelief. I tried to speak his name, but my mouth filled with iron. At the top of the stairs stood Margaret, his mother, immaculate as always in her cream cardigan and pearls. Her eyes were the color of winter glass, calm, untouched. She looked down at me, and in a whisper that sliced deeper than the fall, she said, "You deserved it." The words moved through the air like smoke, soft and lethal. I stared at her shoes, clean, polished, resting on the same step where my blood now pooled. For a moment, I thought she might come down, call for help, do something human. Instead, she turned away, the sound of her teacup clinking against porcelain echoing through the hallway. My phone had landed near the baseboard. I dragged my arm forward, the skin on my elbow tearing on the edge of a step. My vision blurred in and out, but I managed to touch the screen. Siri's voice crackled cold and mechanical. "Who would you like to call, 911?" My voice broke. A shadow passed over me, Ethan's boots. He crouched, breath uneven, face pale, but eyes wild. "You'll ruin everything," he hissed. "Don't you dare." I saw the veins in his neck tighten. His hand brushed my cheek, almost tender, then pressed against my throat, not hard, but enough to remind me he still could. "Stay down," he said, and for a second I believed he might finish what he started. But then blue lights flashed outside the stained glass window, painting the walls with fragments of sirens. He froze. The knock came fast, heavy, urgent. "Police!" I tried to move my mouth to scream to tell them what he had done. Ethan stood, adjusted his collar, and walked upstairs as if nothing had happened. The door burst open. 2 officers rushed in their flashlights, slicing through the gold-lit hallway. Margaret appeared again, her expression one of serene concern. "Officers," she said calmly. "Please," she fell. My son tried to help. I lay there, unable to speak, the world fading into a dull, steady hum. One of the officers knelt beside me. "Ma'am, stay with me." His voice floated somewhere far away. The chandelier above me blurred into light. I wanted to tell him I hadn't fallen. I wanted to tell him about the whisper, the lie, the teacup. But all I managed was a single breath before the darkness took me thick and soundless like the space between heartbeats. When I woke, the ceiling above me wasn't the one from our house. It was a sterile white square filled with humming light. The air smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked asphalt. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed the fall, that maybe the pain was just memory playing tricks, but then I tried to breathe and a hot stab spread across my ribs. The monitor beside me beeped with each gasp, too loud, too honest. A nurse appeared, her shoes whispering against the tile. "Mrs. Ward, you're safe now. Don't move." Her voice was soft, but her eyes flicked to the bruises on my neck, and I knew she didn't believe in safety any more than I did. My body felt foreign, wrapped in gauze and IV lines. Every inch ached, but what hurt most was the silence. Ethan wasn't there. Neither was his mother. I asked for my phone. The nurse hesitated, then said quietly, "The police took it as evidence." Evidence. The word rolled through my mind like a stone dropped in water. A detective entered a few minutes later, a woman in her 40s, sharp, composed eyes like someone who'd seen too much. "Detective Laura Chen," she said, showing her badge. "I need to ask you a few questions. Do you remember what happened?" My lips trembled. I nodded, but before I could speak, a familiar perfume drifted into the room. Jasmine and fear. "Margaret." She stood behind the detective, her smile perfectly rehearsed. "Poor thing," she murmured. She fell down the stairs. My son tried to catch her. My heart hammered against the bandages. Laura's eyes shifted from Margaret to me. "Is that true, Mrs. Ward?" My voice came out cracked and dry. He pushed me. Margaret didn't flinch. She only sighed, tilting her head. "She's been under stress lately. You know how fragile she's been. Gaslighting clean and practiced." I could see Laura recognize it too. She closed her notebook and said evenly, We'll take statements later. For now, Mrs. Ward needs rest. Margaret leaned closer, her breath brushing my ear. Don't ruin him, she whispered. You'll regret it. Then she walked out, heels clicking like a metronome, marking my fear. Hours passed. The morphine dulled the pain, but not the memories. I saw the stairs again, the flash of Ethan's face, the whisper. When night came, rain tapped against the window, soft but relentless. A young nurse adjusted my IV, then hesitated. Do you want me to note anything specific in the report? She asked. My chest burned as I spoke. Write this: bruises on wrists, fractured ribs, hand-shaped marks. Her pen paused mid-air. Should I note who caused them? I met her eyes. Yes. My husband. She nodded slowly, and for the first time that day, I felt the smallest crack in their fortress of silence. Outside, thunder rolled across the city like the echo of truth, finally stirring awake. Before the fall, my life looked perfect on paper. Ethan Ward was the kind of man people envied a successful architect. Steady voice, immaculate suits, the kind of smile that made people trust him before he even spoke. We met when I was 28 in a cafe near downtown Denver where I worked as a junior interior designer. He bought my coffee by accident, laughed it off, and within a month I was sure he was the safest choice I'd ever made. He said I grounded him. I said he gave me direction. I didn't realize how easily direction could become control. In the beginning, the control came dressed as care. He'd text me when you get home, so I know you're safe. Sweet. Then, wear the blue dress tonight, you look professional in that. Polite. Then, maybe skip lunch with your coworkers. They don't really understand you. Protective. The slope was so gradual I mistook it for love. Margaret adored me at first, or pretended to. She'd host Sunday dinners in that large Tudor house she called the Ward Estate, her china gleaming under chandelier light. You're good for him, she'd say, patting my hand with her thin, cold fingers. He needs someone who won't challenge him. I used to think it was a compliment. It wasn't. After we married, Ethan insisted we move into one of his projects, a modern home he'd designed himself, all glass and clean lines. It's us, he said, transparent. The irony still burns. The transparency was one way. His eyes on me, mine hidden behind politeness. The first time he raised his voice, it was about dinner. I said medium rare Isabella. His tone wasn't anger, it was disappointment, the kind that made you feel like a child who'd failed a test. He apologized afterward, kissed my hair, said he was tired. I forgave him. The second time he threw a glass. Not at me, near me. You're lucky it wasn't aimed, he muttered, sweeping up the shards himself as though he were the victim. Margaret called the next morning. Men get stressed, she said. Your job is to keep the peace. I almost believed her. Months bled into years of subtle rules and unspoken punishments. If I questioned him, he'd freeze me out for days. If I succeeded at work, he'd find fault in something trivial. You're too ambitious. Bella men don't like that. Margaret reinforced every word. He's a good husband, she'd remind me. Don't provoke him. She made my silence sound noble. When my father died last year, Ethan didn't come to the funeral. He never liked me, he said, as though grief were a competition he refused to lose. That night, I sat on the porch alone, holding my father's old watch, the one he said measured honesty more than time. I think that was the moment I first stopped believing Ethan's version of love. Still leaving felt impossible. Every time I imagined packing a bag, Margaret's voice echoed. A woman who breaks her vows, breaks herself. The house became a museum of quiet compliance. No arguments, just tension folded into the corners of rooms. Until the morning I found the bank notice. He'd taken a second mortgage against the house without telling me. My signature was forged. When I confronted him, he smiled calmly. You're overreacting. I'll fix it. But the lie had cracked something permanent. That was 2 days before he pushed me down the stairs. Looking back, it wasn't sudden. It was the final act of a man whose control was slipping and a woman who had finally said no. After I found the forged mortgage papers, the house no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage. And Ethan was the director who refused to let the actors improvise. I confronted him that evening while he stood in the kitchen pouring whiskey. His shirt sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. Why is my name on this? I asked, holding up the document. He didn't even look at it. Because we're married, he said calmly, taking a sip. Our finances are shared. Stop dramatizing. You signed my name. His eyes lifted then, and something sharp flickered behind the blue. You're accusing me of fraud. I'm asking for honesty. He set his glass down with precision. Isabella, you're not built for stress. You twist everything into betrayal. Maybe that's why your father never trusted you with money. The words hit like a slap, not for what they said, but how easily he weaponized the dead. Don't talk about him, I said quietly. Then stop acting like him, Ethan replied. He smiled a thin line that carried more threat than warmth. Later, I found Margaret waiting in the driveway as though summoned by instinct. He's under pressure, she said the moment I opened the door. You shouldn't have cornered him. He forged my signature, I said. That's a crime. She tilted her head, pity softening her voice. Everything doesn't have to be legal, dear. Marriage is about trust. Then why doesn't he trust me? Because you make him feel small. The sentence hung between us like poison. That night, Ethan apologized. He always did. He brought me tea, kissed my forehead, told me I was the only one who could calm him. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that the man who used to trace constellations on my skin wasn't the same one who forged my name. But when he whispered, "Don't ever question me again," the tea turned bitter in my throat. The next morning, my coworker Marlene noticed the tension I couldn't hide. You okay? She asked during lunch, her voice low. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words stuck. Just tired. You look like someone who hasn't been sleeping for months, she said. If you need a lawyer, my cousin's firm handles domestic. It's not like that. I interrupted too quickly. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. I didn't blame her. That night, Ethan called my phone 37 times while I worked late. When I got home, the living room lights were off. He was sitting in the dark, phone in hand. Where were you, work? You didn't answer. I was driving. He nodded slowly, then stood. You're lying. His calm scared me more than his rage. He walked closer, placed his hands on my shoulders, his grip deceptively gentle. You'll ruin us if you keep doubting me. Then, as if on cue, Margaret called. On speaker, her voice floated into the silence. Did you two make up? Ethan smiled faintly and squeezed my shoulder. We're perfect, Mom, he said. I stood there, my body stiff, realizing that I wasn't part of a marriage. I was part of a performance, one written by two people who'd rather see me broken than free. And for the first time, I began to think about rewriting the script myself. The breaking point didn't come as a scream. It came as a whisper, a quiet thought that slid into my mind one night while I stared at the reflection of the chandelier in the living room window. He will kill me one day and they'll call it an accident. That realization didn't feel dramatic. It felt factual, like something my body had known long before my mind was ready to admit it. Ethan had been drinking more, and the tension between us had taken on a pulse of its own. He no longer shouted. He simply watched me. Every movement, every breath cataloged for future punishment. The morning it all began unraveling, I found the bruises he'd left last night, thumb-shaped shadows blooming across my ribs. When I confronted him, he just smiled. You bruise easy, Bella. Maybe you should stop provoking me. His mother called an hour later. Ethan tells me you've been emotional again, she said, her voice tight with moral superiority. He worries about you. You should be grateful someone still does. He's hurting me, I said flatly. Silence. Then, don't exaggerate. You know how men get when they're pushed too far. I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I remember walking into the bathroom and looking at myself in the mirror, the split lip, the small cut near my hairline, the eyes that didn't look like mine anymore. My father used to tell me, when you stop recognizing yourself, it's time to leave. I whispered those words aloud. And then I made a plan. I began documenting everything, the bruises, the forged documents, the text messages. I emailed copies to my work account labeled under client records. I called Marlene's cousin, the lawyer she'd mentioned using my office phone during lunch break. You're in danger, the lawyer said after listening. Start preparing quietly. We'll move fast when you're ready. That night, Ethan came home earlier than usual. The sound of his car tires on the gravel sent my pulse into overdrive. He walked in with that calm, deceptive smile. You've been distant, he said, placing his keys on the counter. We should fix that." "There's nothing to fix," I replied carefully. "I just need space." He laughed a short, sharp sound. "Space. You think this is a game?" He grabbed my wrist hard enough to make the bruise bloom darker. "You're my wife." His breath reeked of bourbon. "And you belong here." I pulled away the edge in my voice, surprising even me. "Not anymore." For a moment he froze. Then the mask cracked. His voice dropped to a growl. "Don't test me." That's when Margaret entered the doorway holding a casserole dish as if this were just another family evening. "Dinner's ready," she announced sweetly. Her eyes flicked to my wrist, then to his face. She smiled. "Everything okay here?" Ethan released me and turned away. "Perfect. Good," she said, setting the dish down. "Because the neighbors are starting to notice the tension. We can't have gossip, can we?" Her tone was sugar-laced with venom. I stepped back, heart pounding. "Do you even hear yourself?" "Of course," she said softly. "And you should too. A smart woman knows when to stop fighting." I looked at her, then really looked, the serene face, the perfect pearls, the cold amusement behind her eyes. She wasn't afraid of Ethan's violence. She was proud of it. It maintained her illusion of control. In that moment, I understood this wasn't just about him losing control. It was about her keeping it. When they both turned away, talking about dinner as if nothing had happened, I slipped upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and began typing. I wrote everything. Dates, times, photos, details. I uploaded it all to the cloud and sent it to the lawyer. Then I sat on the floor, trembling, listening to their muffled voices downstairs. Somewhere between fear and fury, something inside me hardened. The woman who used to apologize for existing was gone. The next time Ethan touched me, it would not end the way he expected. 2 days after I sent the files to the lawyer, Ethan found out. I still don't know how. Maybe Margaret saw my emails, maybe he checked my computer history, but that night everything changed. He came home silent, too silent, the kind of silence that made the walls feel alive. He poured himself a drink, sat across from me, and said, "You've been busy." I froze. He slid a printed page across the table. It was one of my emails, my statement draft to the lawyer. My stomach turned to ice. "You went through my files," I said. He smiled without humor. "Our files, Isabella. Everything in this house belongs to both of us, remember?" His voice was steady, but his eyes were dead. "You're destroying this family. You think you can run to the police, cry victim, and what ruined my career?" I tried to speak, but he slammed his hand against the table. "Do you have any idea what happens to women who make false accusations?" "They survive," I whispered. That made him laugh. "Not if I get there first." He stood up, pacing slowly. "You'll retract it. Tomorrow, you'll call whoever you emailed and say you were emotional. You'll apologize. And you'll delete everything." "No," I said quietly. It was a small word, but it filled the room. His jaw clenched. He grabbed my phone, scrolled through the contacts, and dialed Margaret. "She's lost it," he said. "She's trying to drag us all down." Within 20 minutes, Margaret arrived wrapped in a silk coat, carrying the kind of calm that only lifelong manipulators wear like armor. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, touching my arm. "You've worked yourself into a state again. Sit. Let's talk like adults." He forged my name. I said, my voice trembling but clear. "He's been hurting me." She sighed. "Ethan, leave us." He hesitated, then stepped into the hallway. Margaret turned back to me, eyes narrowing. "You're making a mistake, Isabella. The police don't protect women like you. They protect men like him." "Then they'll have to change that," I said. "You're not strong enough for war," she replied, her tone almost tender. "You think people will believe you? You look unstable. You have no children, no family of your own, and you've lived off his money for years. What story do you think the world will hear?" Her words were knives disguised as truth. "The right one," I said. "Because I have evidence." Her lips twitched the faintest crack in her composure. "Then you'd better hope it's enough." When she left, the house felt colder than ever. Ethan didn't speak to me that night. He just stood at the foot of the bed watching me as I pretended to sleep. The next morning, 2 police officers knocked on the door. I thought for one terrified second that Margaret had turned me in for something. But it was a welfare check someone from my office had called after I missed work and didn't answer messages. I'll never forget the way Ethan greeted them, warm, friendly, cooperative. "Officer, he said my wife's been under a lot of stress. Her father's death, some medication changes. I've been worried about her mental health." The officers glanced at me, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. I wanted to scream to show them the bruises, but Ethan stood so close I could smell his cologne, the scent that had once meant safety. "See," he murmured, "they'll always believe me first." That was the moment I realized the war had already begun, and I would need to fight it on his battlefield using truth as my only weapon. After that day, Ethan turned my life into a quiet battlefield. No more shouting, no visible bruises, just subtle destruction. He switched my phone charger with a broken one so my calls wouldn't go through. He erased messages from my lawyer and replaced them with texts he'd written to himself under my name. Fake apologies, fake confessions. "You see," he said one morning, holding up his phone. "You admitted you lied." He was meticulous. Each lie small enough to seem believable, each manipulation perfectly timed. I tried to document everything again, but he'd already found my passwords. Every move I made he anticipated. "You're paranoid," he'd whisper when I locked the bedroom door. "You're sick," when I flinched at his touch. "You need help." And sometimes late at night, I almost believed him. That's the cruelty of gaslighting. It doesn't just distort truth, it rewrites your mind. Margaret visited almost daily. She brought soup, concern, and quiet threats. "You're making Ethan miserable," she said one afternoon, stirring sugar into her tea as if discussing the weather. "He can't focus at work. Clients are asking questions." "Maybe he should stop hitting his wife," I said. Her eyes flicked up sharp. "Careful, dear. Words like that stick. The police already have a note in their system that you're emotionally unstable. You called 911 before, remember? Then you didn't file a report. They think you're dramatic." My chest tightened. She smiled. "It's better to make peace than enemies." That night, I went into the guest room and sat in the dark. The moonlight through the blinds striped the carpet like prison bars. My mind replayed everything she said, every seed she'd planted. Was I dramatic? Was I overreacting? I pressed my palm against my ribs and felt the ridged bones where fractures had healed wrong. No, this was real. The next morning, I found the key to the safe Ethan kept in his study. It was small and silver taped under his desk drawer. Inside, there were bank documents, property deeds, and something I hadn't expected: Margaret's signature on a notarized statement transferring joint ownership of the house to Ethan in case of Isabella's mental incapacity. My hands trembled as I read the date. It had been signed 2 weeks before the accident. It wasn't just abuse anymore. It was premeditated erasure. I took photos of everything, every page, every signature. Then I sent them to my lawyer's encrypted drive. That evening, Ethan came home early again. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was calm, almost kind. "I talked to Margaret. She's worried about you." "Everyone is. Maybe it's time you checked into a clinic for a little while." I stared at him, my heartbeat loud in my ears. "A clinic?" I repeated. "For what?" "Exhaustion. Anxiety. You need rest. You've been forgetting things." He smiled gently, the same smile he wore on our wedding day. "You sent strange emails, Bella. Do you remember doing that?" My throat went dry. "You forged those." He laughed softly. "Always blaming someone else. That's your problem." Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is a medical evaluation I drafted. I'll have a psychiatrist sign it. You'll stay somewhere nice, peaceful. No phones, no stress." "You mean no escape?" I said. His eyes darkened. "If you keep fighting me, you'll lose more than your reputation." When he walked away, I waited until I heard his car leave, then locked myself in the bathroom and vomited. The bile burned my throat, but it cleared my fear. I knew now he didn't just want control. He wanted to erase me completely. And Margaret would help him. I looked at my reflection and whispered, "Not this time." Then I took the flash drive with the photos, hid it in the lining of my coat, and texted one word to my lawyer before deleting the message. Ready. The war was no longer about survival. It was about truth and making them choke on it. The next morning, I woke before dawn, heart hammering, the house still wrapped in that awful, curated silence Ethan loved. It was a Sunday, the one day Margaret always came early to check in. I didn't have much time. I opened the closet, pulled out my winter coat, and ran my fingers along the inner lining until I felt the small metal edge of the flash drive. It was still there. My entire life, my bruises, the forged documents, the property transfer fit inside that inch of silver. I drove to my office, using the side streets, careful not to pass the cafe Ethan's colleagues frequented. The streets of Denver were half awake, the sky still violet with dawn. I parked behind the building and used my work keycard to slip inside. My hands shook as I logged into my computer. The lawyer Cassandra Hill was already waiting online. "You're early," she said. "I couldn't sleep," I replied. "I found more." When I sent her the files, she was silent for almost a minute. Then her voice hardened. "This isn't just abuse anymore, Isabella. This is conspiracy and fraud. We'll go to the DA today." My stomach twisted. "If I file this, he'll know. He'll find out either way," she said. "The question is, do you want to survive or do you want to disappear?" The words hit like a slap. "I want to survive." "Then listen carefully," she said. "When you go home, act normal. Don't let them see you're leaving. The police will come with a warrant by evening. We'll have protection ready." I nodded, though my voice shook. "Thank you." When I left the office, the morning light was harsh and cold. I drove home, rehearsing my calm. Ethan's car was gone, but Margaret's was in the driveway. I stepped inside and found her in the kitchen slicing fruit with surgical precision. "You're up early," she said without looking at me. "Couldn't sleep." "You should rest. You look awful." Her tone carried the false kindness of someone who enjoys watching weakness. I poured coffee, hands steady despite the tremor inside. "You know," she continued, "Ethan loves you more than you deserve. You should thank him instead of tormenting him." I turned toward her. "You've spent years covering for him. Does it make you proud?" She smiled faintly. "It makes me useful." My phone buzzed a text from Cassandra. "Detective Chen has the warrant." 30 minutes. My pulse jumped. Margaret's eyes flicked to the screen. "Work trouble." "Just a client," I said, forcing a smile. "Always clients." She studied me for a beat too long. "You're hiding something," she said softly. "You were always terrible at pretending." I didn't answer. The clock ticked loud in the silence. Then, as if on cue, Ethan's car pulled into the driveway. Margaret smiled. Showtime. He walked in with that same chilling calm. "Morning, darling," he said. "You disappeared early." "Just errands," I replied. "You look tired," he said, stepping close. His hand brushed my cheek like a test. "I think today's the day we fix everything." My throat closed. "What do you mean you'll sign the papers again? A clean version. Then we can move forward." "No," I said. His smile dropped. It wasn't a question. He reached for the papers on the counter, slid them toward me, and handed me a pen. My heart pounded. And then, 3 knocks. Sharp, deliberate. "Denver Police Department," a woman's voice called. Ethan froze. Margaret's face drained of color. "What the hell is this?" he hissed. I didn't answer. The door burst open. Detective Chen entered with 2 uniformed officers. "Ethan Ward, she said we have a warrant to search your property in connection with allegations of fraud and domestic assault." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "You think you can destroy me?" he spat. I met his gaze and said quietly, "No, you did that yourself." The search lasted 6 hours. Every drawer, every hard drive, every cabinet was photographed and cataloged while Ethan paced the living room like a trapped wolf. Margaret sat stiffly on the sofa, her composure cracking only when Detective Chen pulled the original forged documents from the study safe. "These are notarized under your name, Mrs. Ward," Chen said, handing the papers to the forensic officer. "Except you never signed them, did you?" My throat was dry, but I forced the words out. "No." He forged every one. Ethan snapped. "You're insane. Those were business drafts, nothing illegal." Chen's expression didn't change. "Then you won't mind that your wife's attorney turned over time-stamped photos, financial transfers, and your mother's signed property transfer dated before the incident." Margaret blanched. "That's private," she said. "Not when it's evidence," Chen replied. "You both conspired to commit fraud." Ethan lunged toward the papers, but the officers moved faster. The sound of handcuffs closing was louder than I expected, clean, final metallic. "You can't do this," he shouted. "She's lying." "You think this is justice?" Chin's tone was cool. "No, Mr. Ward, this is accountability." Margaret stood abruptly, her pearls shaking against her throat. "You don't understand," she said. "She provoked him. She threatened our family name." I turned toward her. "I begged for help," I said quietly. "You told me to stay silent." Her lips trembled, but no sound came. They led Ethan out first. He twisted once in the doorway to look at me. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You'll regret this." His voice broke on the last word, and for the first time I heard something small and pathetic under the rage fear. Then the door shut and the house went still. Margaret remained frozen on the sofa, her face ashen. "You've ruined him," she whispered. "No, I said he ruined himself." She stood shakily, eyes burning with something between hatred and disbelief. "You'll destroy this family's reputation." "Good," I said. "It deserves to burn." She stumbled toward the door, clutching her purse like a shield. "You'll never understand loyalty," she spat. "Loyalty, I said, isn't covering up a crime." When she left, the silence was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat echoing against the marble floors. I expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt hollow. The house that had been a prison now felt like a corpse cold, emptied of meaning. Chin stayed behind as the team loaded boxes into evidence trucks. "You did well," she said. "This isn't over, but it's a solid start." "Will he get bail?" I asked. "Unlikely. We'll push for holding him until trial." His mother, though, she's another story. She'll try to spin it as misunderstanding. Wealth buys time. I nodded. But not innocence. "No," Chin said softly. "Never that." 2 days later, it was everywhere, architect arrested for domestic assault and financial fraud. His mugshot was on every local news channel. The photo made him look smaller, his hair disheveled, the arrogance gone. Margaret's face appeared once leaving the courthouse in sunglasses, refusing to comment. The narrative she'd spent years controlling had shattered. My inbox filled with messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Coworkers, neighbors, even strangers. Some offered sympathy, others confessed they'd suspected something but hadn't known how to help. My lawyer advised me to avoid interviews, but the story had already taken on a life of its own. One afternoon, I received a call from a local women's shelter asking if I'd be willing to speak anonymously about recognizing signs of coercive control. I hesitated. The thought of my name, my pain becoming public, made my skin crawl, but silence had nearly killed me. "Yes," I said finally, "but not as a victim, as proof." The night the segment aired, I sat on my couch under a blanket, watching the anchor summarize my life in 3 minutes. She documented everything the reporter said. She trusted her instincts, and she refused to sign what her conscience couldn't defend. I closed my eyes, the line echoing like my father's voice through time. Outside, flashbulbs popped at the gate as reporters camped for a glimpse of me. But for the first time, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't afraid. I had dragged their secrets into the light, and the truth was louder than their silence had ever been. The courtroom smelled of old wood and cold air, the kind of place where truth had to crawl through procedure before it could breathe. It was 6 months after the arrest. By then, the story had spread beyond Denver articles about domestic control, financial abuse, and the illusion of perfect marriages. People whispered the Ward case as if it were folklore, not my life. Ethan sat at the defense table immaculate as ever, though thinner now, his suit hanging off him like borrowed confidence. Margaret sat behind him, pearls still in place. Her gaze fixed straight ahead, refusing to meet mine. I wore a navy blazer and the same silver watch my father had given me when I turned 21, the one he'd said would remind me of my worth when others tried to measure it for me. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might echo against the paneled walls. The prosecution began with the evidence-forged mortgage papers, the bank withdrawals, the notarized transfer Margaret had signed. Cassandra. My lawyer stood tall as she guided the jury through every document. This, she said, holding up one page, is a signature that belongs to Mrs. Isabella Ward, but it wasn't written by her. The defendant created this forgery to seize control of her home, her assets, and ultimately, her autonomy. Ethan's attorney objected, muttering something about emotional exaggeration. The judge overruled it. When they played the audio from one of the hidden microphones I'd installed the week before my fall, the air in the room changed. Ethan's voice calm but venomous. "You think anyone will believe you? You bruise easy. You should stop provoking me." My own voice followed shaky pleading. "You forged my name." Then his laugh. "Our name? It's the same now, isn't it?" Someone in the jury flinched. I could feel the energy shift to the illusion cracking. Margaret's recorded voice came next from a separate file I'd found in her own security system, the one she'd installed to protect the house. It had captured her words the morning of the fall when she leaned over me and whispered, "You deserved it." The audio wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough that the courtroom went utterly still. Margaret went pale, her composure disintegrating one heartbeat at a time. The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Ward," he said, "is that your voice?" She didn't answer. Her attorney rose, whispering something urgently, but it was too late. The damage was done. When it was my turn to testify, the walk to the stand felt endless. My palms were damp, but my spine stayed straight. Cassandra gave me a nod, steady, reassuring. "Mrs. Ward," the prosecutor said gently, "can you tell the court in your own words what happened on the day of your injury?" I looked at Ethan. For a moment, I saw not the man who'd hurt me, but the ghost of the man I once loved, the man who'd made me believe that obedience was affection. Then I exhaled. "He threw me," I said quietly. He looked me in the eye and pushed me down the stairs. And when I was lying there bleeding, his mother leaned over me and told me I deserved it. The room was silent except for the scribbling of pens. "Why didn't you leave sooner?" the prosecutor asked. "Because that's what everyone wonders. Because leaving doesn't feel like freedom when you've been taught it's betrayal," I said. "Because I thought love meant patience. Because I thought if I was quieter, kinder, smaller, he'd stop." "And did he?" I met her eyes. "No, he got worse." When the defense cross-examined me, they tried to paint me as unstable, emotional, prone to exaggeration. They brought up my therapy sessions, my father's death, even the fact that I once took a week off work for stress. "Isn't it true," the lawyer said, "that you sometimes overreact?" I almost laughed. "Yes," I said, "like the day I overreacted to being thrown down a flight of stairs." The courtroom murmured, and the judge called for order, but I saw the faintest smile tug at Cassandra's lips. After days of testimony, the closing arguments felt like the final exhale of a long, poisoned breath. Cassandra stood before the jury, her voice low but steady. "This case isn't about a fall. It's about a pattern, a man who built walls around a woman and called them marriage, a mother who watched those walls tighten and called it love. Isabella didn't just survive violence. She dismantled the system that protected it." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. 3 hours that felt like 3 years. When they returned, the foreperson stood eyes level. "On the count of aggravated assault, we find the defendant Ethan Ward guilty. On the count of fraud and forgery, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, Margaret Ward guilty." The words landed like thunder. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed for what felt like the first time in years. Ethan turned to me, his face blank, the mask finally gone. "You destroyed everything," he said. "No," I whispered. "I rebuilt myself." The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison, Margaret to 2 with probation. When the gavel struck, it echoed through the courtroom like a heartbeat finding rhythm again. As I walked out into the sunlight, the cameras flashed reporters shouting my name. I didn't answer any of them. I just kept walking, the sound of the verdict replaying in my mind like a song that had finally found its last note. The first morning after the verdict, I woke up to silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of the ward house, but the kind that feels like mercy. Sunlight spilled across the room of my new apartment, a small space in Capitol Hill with peeling paint and the smell of coffee from the cafe below. I had signed the lease under my maiden name, Isabella Brooks, reclaiming it like an heirloom I'd forgotten I owned. For the first few weeks, I didn't sleep much. I kept expecting footsteps outside my door, a voice at the edge of the dark. Trauma teaches your body to anticipate ghosts. Every sound was a trigger, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, even the clink of my mug against the counter. but the fear that once ruled me began to fade, replaced by something quieter but stronger clarity. Detective Chin called once a week for updates on the sentencing paperwork. Her voice had become an anchor in the chaos. "He won't be eligible for parole until 2036, she said. "You're safe, Isabella." "Safe," I repeated. It still felt like a foreign language. I started therapy through a local survivor program. The first session nearly broke me. The counselor asked me to describe what home meant, and I couldn't answer. The word had been ruined. But over time, the walls I'd built around my heart began to crack. Healing wasn't dramatic, it was painfully slow, like thawing ice. Some days I cried while folding laundry. Other days I managed to laugh at a silly movie and felt guilty for it. My counselor told me survivors often confuse peace with boredom. "You've lived in chaos so long that quiet feels wrong." She was right. Marlene, my coworker, visited often. She'd bring takeout and updates from the office. "You know the clients are asking for you back," she said one night. "They miss your eye for detail." I smiled, unsure. "I'm not ready to design rooms again." "Then design your life," she said. "Start with one corner." So I did. I bought a new lamp, a small rug, and a plant that refused to die no matter how often I forgot to water it. I even started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. The first thing I painted was a staircase, not the one I fell down, but one bathed in sunlight leading upward. News about the case eventually quieted, replaced by newer scandals. But one afternoon, I received an email from a women's shelter. "Your story helped 3 women come forward," it read. One of them said your interview gave her the courage to call the police. I sat at my kitchen table, phone in hand, tears blurring the screen. For the first time, the pain didn't feel wasted. It felt transformed. Margaret never contacted me again. Her attorney sent notice that she'd sold her estate to cover legal fees. The ward name, once polished like glass, had shattered. A part of me pitied her, not because she didn't deserve the fall, but because she'd built her life on control, and control is the first thing the truth takes away. I visited my father's grave that spring, bringing white roses and the watch he'd given me. The cemetery was quiet except for birdsong. I sat on the grass, tracing the engraved letters of his name. "You were right," I whispered. "When you stop recognizing yourself, it's time to leave." The breeze lifted my hair warm and kind, as if the world itself exhaled with me. On the drive home, I passed the courthouse steps, the same ones I'd climbed 6 months earlier, with shaking hands and a bruised heart. They gleamed in the afternoon sun. I parked the car and got out, walking up those stairs slowly, deliberately. I didn't know why at first, but when I reached the top, I realized this was the same place I had once testified trembling. Now I stood tall, breathing evenly. That night, I opened my windows and let the city sounds pour in cars, laughter, life. I brewed tea, wrote in my journal, and for the first time ended a page with a single word: free. Healing hadn't been a cinematic victory. It had been a quiet reclaiming, a slow return to self. But it was mine, and it was enough. 6 months later, I stood backstage at a community center in downtown Denver, staring at the small crowd gathering in folding chairs. The banner behind the podium read, "Rebuilding After Silence, Voices of Survival." My palms were damp. I'd spoken in court to police, to therapists, but never like this. Never to strangers who were looking to me for something I wasn't sure I could give. "Cassandra." My lawyer stood beside me, offering a steady smile. "You don't owe them perfection," she said. "You just have to be honest." When they called my name, I walked up to the podium, the microphone cool under my fingers. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I saw them, the faces of women and men, young and old, sitting in stillness waiting. I began. "My name is Isabella Brooks," I said. For years, I answered to another name, one that came with a house, a husband, and a silence that nearly killed me. People think abuse looks like bruises. Sometimes it looks like charm, like the person who brings you tea after they break your ribs, like a mother-in-law who says you deserved it and teaches you to believe her. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I told them about the stairs, the whisper, the camera that caught her words. I told them about the courtroom, the verdict, the emptiness that followed. I didn't dramatize it. I just told it as it was. When I said healing isn't loud, it's the quiet decision to live again, someone in the front row started to cry. Afterward, a woman approached me. She was in her 60s with silver hair and hands that trembled slightly as she held mine. "I stayed for 40 years," she said. "I thought leaving was betrayal. You made me realize staying was—" Her voice cracked. "Thank you." That night, walking home, I realized something that felt almost sacred. The story wasn't mine anymore. It had become something larger, a mirror for others to see themselves and a map to climb out. A few months later, a journalist from a national network requested an interview. I hesitated. I didn't want to be a headline again. But the producer said softly, "We're not looking for scandal, Isabella. We're looking for hope." I agreed under one condition, that they show not my bruises, but my rebuilding. The segment aired under the title, "She Recorded the Silence." They filmed in my small apartment, sunlight streaming through the window, my painting of the staircase hanging on the wall behind me. I talked about gaslighting, about how abusers rewrite the narrative until you doubt your own mind. I talked about the justice system, how it failed, and how it finally worked when evidence met persistence. But mostly, I talked about truth. "People ask if I forgive them," I said on camera. "I don't. Forgiveness implies what they did can be undone. It can't. But I've made peace with the fact that I survived them. That's enough." The interview went viral, not because it was sensational, but because it was raw. Viewers from across the country sent letters and emails. Some said they'd reported their abusers. Others said they'd just stopped blaming themselves. One message simply read, "Thank you for reminding me that I'm not crazy." The night it aired, I stood on my balcony watching the city lights flicker below like stars misplaced on Earth. My phone buzzed endlessly, but I let it ring. For once, I didn't need validation. I had already found it in the quiet corners of my own life. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the Department of Corrections. Ethan had been transferred to a state prison up north. The letter noted his parole ineligibility and his request to send an apology through his attorney. I stared at the envelope for a long time before tearing it in half. There were some doors I would never open again. As for Margaret, she had withdrawn from society entirely. A former neighbor emailed me saying she'd moved into a retirement home, rarely speaking to anyone. For a moment, I pictured her alone in that cold perfection she worshipped. Silence finally turned against her. I didn't feel joy or vengeance, just distance. On the anniversary of the verdict, I drove to the courthouse again. The sky was bright, the same marble steps gleaming under sunlight. I climbed them slowly, the sound of my heels echoing like a heartbeat. At the top, I paused and looked down, not to relive the pain, but to honor the distance between who I was and who I had become. For a long time, I just stood there breathing. Then I whispered not to anyone in particular, but to the memory of that broken girl on the stairs. We made it. As I turned to leave, a young woman passing by stopped me. "You're Isabella Brooks, right? I saw your interview," she said, her eyes wet. "I left last week. I thought you should know." I smiled the kind of smile that reaches the bones. "I'm glad you did," I said. "Keep walking. Don't look back." She nodded, and for a moment I saw my younger self reflected in her, the same fear, the same spark of defiance beginning to bloom. When I walked away, the afternoon light bathed the steps in gold. It struck me that I'd fallen once at the bottom of a staircase, but I'd risen at the top of another. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Freedom didn't look like escape. It looked like standing tall, finally unafraid to be seen.